Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. So I have a few slides to summarize what was by and large announced in recent news digest to the whole world. So SCOC stands for Survey Cadence Optimization Committee, and that will be a very important committee that will decide on the strategy with which we will start operations. And it will also address early science program, etc. So the bottom line is that we still have freedom to optimize how we will collect observations, and we want to make LSST, the survey itself, as good as it can be, taking into account constraints of the observing system and observing conditions, science drivers, and of course, it also depends on which scientists are invested in our mission and legacy. It will have imprint of people who are working on it. But definitely bottom line is that we cannot leave this to the project to decide. It has to be a much wider group of people. All our science collaborations will have input. And then there is also astropolitics that we have to do through the community rather than some closed door decision by the project. So the charge includes many points. I highlighted few in these slides. So the main reason for having SCOC is to make specific recommendations for the cadence choices that we will implement in the scheduler, and we will start survey with that strategy that SCOC will settle on over next year and a half or two. And then, of course, during the survey, we will revisit how we are doing and perhaps modify it further. We also need help to communicate why we decided to undertake that survey. We hope that will be a transparent process that will be based on reason and numerical analysis of existing simulations. In other words, we hope if we had to do it again, we would arrive to the same conclusion and same strategy. And then once we settle on the main strategy, then we will try to modify it for the first N months, where N is somewhere between 3 and 9, to enhance the early science outcome of the survey. We'll try to minimize the changes of the main strategy, and at the same time with those changes, we'll try to maximize the early science. And then during operations, there will be an internal committee working group within the project, within the operations team called Survey Evaluation Working Group. It will be chaired by Lynn Jones, and we will have regular survey progress tracking tools and regular reports to the SCOC, and then we might optimize the survey as we progress. So our goals for this committee is that it's based on expertise that includes the best experts we have within scientists that are invested already in the survey, that the process is transparent, that the committee is diverse, and that decisions we will be making are inclusive, and we will take input from science collaborations at large rather than handpicking 10 people who will then make all the decisions on their own. We hope this to be open and transparent process. So another important thing is that these representatives, there are 11 people on the committee, plus Lynn Jones ex officio, non-voting, and me ex officio as the chair of the committee, also non-voting. Did someone try to ask a question? I heard some background noise. I'll carry on. Okay, I'll carry on. So one important thing is to realize that these members are not representatives of science collaborations. I think most of them are members of science collaboration, not represent the specific interests of their science collaboration. Rather, this committee should be similar to the Science Advisory Committee chaired by Michael Strauss and the Project Science team chaired by myself. And we always attempt to optimize the global scientific productivity of LSST rather than advocating for a specific science. We also want the SCOC members to actively seek input and advice from all members of the scientific community, especially from our science collaborations who are doing most work in setting up the survey. We want the whole process to be transparent. We will share all the information that we exchange in a public domain, with emphasis on our various cadence reports that are about to come out by the time of PCW. And we will also modify slightly schedule. So this is not done yet, but you can see in a red font, these are existing deadlines, and we want to push them out a little bit. These are the blue deadlines that's enabled by COVID-19 delays, but it's desired because we'll do a better job if we have more time. And there is no point in pushing it aggressively and then be done and still with a year of construction ahead of us. The main, in addition to schedule changes, the main new feature of the plan includes 2 new workshops. And drivers for these workshops are, for the first one, we want to give a chance to the SSC to receive feedback from collaborations about the new generation of 100+ simulated surveys that Lynn and Peter are producing. And we plan to deliver a detailed technical report about the statistical behavior of those surveys by the time of PCW 2020. Well, how exactly we will organize the session, we don't know yet, but we do have next Monday, second telecon of the SCOC, and we'll discuss how exactly to present that report. We hope to deliver the reports to the committee by the end of July, so we'll have 2 weeks to optimize details. So then, based on that feedback from that first workshop, we hope we can settle on the initial strategy. And what I mean by that is that out of many different ways to undertake survey that are included in those 100+ simulated surveys, and that were drawn from the white papers we solicited and collected about 2 years ago, that we choose one overall strategy. But within the chosen strategy, there will still be numerical knobs to fine tune, like where exactly do you put boundaries of your regions on the sky? What exactly is the exposure time? Does it have to be the same for each band, and so on? So within the overall concept, there is still a lot of optimization work to be done. And so we hope to undertake this optimization again in collaboration with everyone, with all stakeholders, and then to culminate this work with a second workshop, where essentially we would have all the information, all the quantitative information required for the committee, for the SOC, to then choose the final initial strategy. So final in a sense that this is it. We have to then freeze that strategy in our minds, as I said, in our hearts, in our docs, and most importantly, in our scheduling code, so that we have code that can actually drive the telescope. At the same time, it's initial strategy, because obviously after we learn more about the system, after of the order 1 year after we begin our operations, we will revisit and we will re-optimize the observing strategy. And we don't know details yet. We still don't know what will happen with COVID-19. So we are still waiting on making the final decision when exactly the first workshop would happen. If it will be in-person workshop or perhaps fully virtual or some hybrid, we will just try to postpone that decision as long as we can, probably until the late fall. And so I have a few minutes more for your questions. I would appreciate questions, because this is first time I'm giving this summary. So I don't know if I chose most interesting details or not, or if I missed something important. Also, I want to point out that Meg is member of that committee. So you also always have Meg at your disposal to get more detail.
Right, and the committee composition is public at this point, right? Sorry if I didn't see it, if it was in your slides, but it's been announced.
Yes, it's on the website. We have 11 people. We are very proud that we managed a very important committee that has over 50% participation by women. It spans all the continent. It includes people from all time zones, including Europe and Australia. So it's a very diverse committee. I think we did a good job in assembling it.
It's going to be fun to organize the phone calls, given that spread in time zones. I have a question that arises from the satellite workshop yesterday, which is, there is one simulation that includes the satellite avoidance algorithm that was asked by Tony to assess the impact of a satellite avoidance algorithm, though really the the sensible way to do this would be to include some satellite avoidance parameter in all the simulations. There enough time to do that and enough knowledge about what the landscape of satellites will be to do that at this time and see how each strategy is affected by satellites.
We will try. It is definitely additional scope. Will, do you want to say something before I answer?
I had a different question, so maybe you should answer the question before getting to me.
Okay. So we will try eventually to undertake these simulations. They're not high priority. We know already that even with 50,000 satellites, it will only be under % impact on the lost pixels. And the main impact on science will be from systematics in our data. How exactly we mask the satellites? Do we fit those trails? If you are doing cosmology, you may just want to put masks. If you are endpoint person, you'll just mask them. It's only sub% effect. But if you want to, for example, find killer asteroid that will hit you in the head perhaps next morning, you do want, during twilight, when they are the worst problem, you not only want to find them, you want to fit them, subtract, because you could still detect objects on top of those trails. So I think priority for work should be to address that part of the problem rather than try to develop a new strategy for Cadence that would beat that sub% level to ppm level or whatever. I don't think that's what's limiting our science. And the initial stuff that we tried didn't work that well. Whatever you do, you will lose few % of efficiency of the scheduler. And we are already highly optimized. We have excellent scheduler. So few % is much more than losing sub% fraction of pixels. So that's the short answer. But that's certainly kind of question I think we should all discuss together at PCW.
Thank you. Will?
I have a much simpler question. So for collaboration members who are still working on preparing figures of merit and mass to assess the latest runs, do I understand correctly that the effective deadline for doing that is the first workshop in possibly early 2021?
I believe that's correct answer to first order. If you came after workshop with some ingenious metric, we would bend backwards to implement it and rerun it on all the simulations. But if it's another epicycle of some existing metric that is of value to your science, but would not have a major impact on how we optimize different strategies, then probably we wouldn't implement it. So to the first order, yes, first workshop should be deadline by when we want to go through the new set of simulations. You will learn from our report what's in there and what are interesting questions, and then you'll have perhaps even up to a year to recheck all of them with your particular science metric.
Okay, thank you.
But I wanna just crush that feeling of comfort that you will have perhaps even up to a year that sentence of Zeljko might give you. We have been historically moving really slow on this front, particularly the science collaborations on figuring out the metrics and how to work them and delivering them for reasons that I am extremely sympathetic to. But I want to say, I think our first deadline is before the PCW, when hopefully we'll have representation from all the science collaborations to the hackathon that we're organizing on metrics and on looking at comparison between metrics from different science collaborations. So I would think that that's the deadline that you shoot for, and then everything else after that ideally would be refining. That is obviously an aspiration, but I would encourage you to think about it like that. Well.
So Fed, so you're saying at least the specifications for figures of merit should be in some decent shape by the hackathon, so they could be acted upon.
Yeah.
I think, okay.
Yeah. Meg?
Yeah, it's kind of weird for me to ask a question, but I'm putting the other hat on, which is, we talked about transparency. We talked about the members representing, they're not representing a science area, although they have a science expertise per se. in terms of transparency and things, I could see being like, okay, I'm organizing another sprint or discussion. I want to invite the SCOC. Should I be inviting everyone? Do I just email Zeljko to do that, or any other science collaboration? How do we connect with the SCOC? And I just was wondering if, Zeljko, if you had thoughts of like, should this kind of be like the DM model where there's like a DM liaison that, you know, instead of blasting everyone or sending you, you get eight invites to all the science collaboration sprints and hackathons or whatever. How do we communicate with these people? Now that I have a list, do I just cold email them or any of the other science collaborations?
I see Fed's hand up.
Yeah, so just for those who haven't seen the composition, there is one member for each science collaboration. I don't remember if there is one science collaboration that doesn't actually have a member on the SCOC, but you know, given all the other priorities, I felt like that was okay because there were people familiar with that science collaboration. So just look at the list and identify your member. I think that this could be solved primarily in that fashion.
Yeah, we have 11
maybe we want to
people,
make it.
so
Go ahead.
it
might be
possible
worth
that
making
we
it
have
more
already.
official.
Yeah. I like Meg's proposal that we appoint people by name to be liaisons, just like we did with DM. Meg, that's an excellent question. I like your proposed solution. I think we should discuss this on Monday with SCOC. If they agree, I think we should go ahead with that proposal.
We have 3 more minutes of Zeljko's time. Any other final quick questions?
And then poof, I disappear.
And he disappears. Yes, Timo. With the strong lensing, right. So I think that's right. That's the strong. It's a strong lens in science collaboration that doesn't have. So we will need to find a liaison specifically for that.
Again, I don't want the algorithm was not that we represent every collaboration. People do not represent science collaborations, but of course there is obvious overlap. So that does not mean that we have anything against strong lensing. and another point to know is that these people will rotate every 2 years. So perhaps next time some other science collaboration will not be represented.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, there are people there that could be good representatives for Cadence in strong lensing, like Dan and Franz even, depending on the cases where we care about Cadence.
Absolutely.
So I guess we should talk to them.
I posted the names on the chat. There's also a link that Meg kindly posted above to the official website where the names are posted, but that's where you see who are the members of your science collaborations on the SCOC, which are deliberately not your representative. Any other questions?
I just have a very quick question. Sorry if I missed this in the beginning, but is the idea that this is a committee that extends throughout the survey period?
Correct. Yes. With rotating members, of course, but the committee itself should last to the end of the survey.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
And if I'm still alive, I'll pay for dinner and wine for everyone at the last day of the survey, whoever survives by that point.
You mean if we're still alive?
I'll mark it on my calendar.
Thank you very much. I'll have to drop off and enjoy Keith's talk. Keith, I'll take a look later. This is going to be recorded. Take care, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Keith, it's on you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and share screen. Okay, are you seeing a Google Doc? Okay. So Federica and I wanted to have a discussion with you all today Both of us are on the scientific organizing committee for the PCW 2020. Pat Burkett is also on that committee. Zeljko is on that committee. Melissa Graham is the chair. We felt that it was really important this year in particular to have a dedicated session at the PCW about topics in justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, specifically as it pertains to Rubin Observatory. So I think that I know that last year there was a parallel session on this topic. I don't know if there have been similar sessions in previous years. I'm just not sure. Maybe other people have been around for longer. No. So I think this is somewhat of a new thing to have a dedicated plenary session on this topic. But I think the motivation is really clear. So Federica and I agreed that we would take a first attempt at trying to organize the session and try to create some structure to facilitate conversation within Rubin. So this document here is kind of a first attempt at trying to collect those thoughts, and your all's feedback is really, really welcome and encouraged, very much valued. So as we were putting this together, and I think this has partly been, certainly been a learning process for me. I think for many people. One of the things we've been learning about is sort of the whole concept of change management and theory of change. And you can probably see some of these initial paragraphs here. These are some paragraphs that are taken from the Team Up report commissioned by the APS, which was specifically looking at how to increase the number of African Americans who are attaining undergraduate degrees in physics and astronomy. But I think, so I kind of put this as like a preliminary, because I feel like there was at least a concern or sort of risk in my mind that I think, all of us have a lot of management experience. And some of the ways that we might sort of typically think about approaching a problem, there could be complexities here that might motivate thinking about things somewhat differently. So, I found that there's a section on change management in the Team Up report that was particularly useful and sort of valuable in my own thinking, and that's still sort of, I feel like that's still sort of coming together in my mind. So what I'll talk about here is sort of some initial ideas that we had, and then I think that we might reframe some of these, but as we're continuing to think about this, and also your input would be really welcome. So one of the things that we wanted to try to do with this PCW session is that we wanted to try to identify some particular specific goal for the whole Rubin ecosystem. So that's the Rubin project, the science collaborations, the broad scientific community. And we thought that this, having some particular goal might help to focus thinking for a 1 hour session. I mean, obviously there could be a lot more said, and this, it'd be really hard. I mean, so that's one of the actually areas where we would like feedback from you all, is if we're sort of choosing the right goal, and how do we sort of handle issues of, the fact that there's many different axes of diversity, intersectionality, and so forth. But what we had been thinking about so far, was to sort of, put forward some kind of target goal that we thought that the whole Rubin ecosystem could get behind, and something that would be big and meaningful, that could happen over, say, the 10 years of LSST operations. So one thing that we've been talking about is this goal here, to maximize the number of graduate students who self-identify as Black, the complete graduate degrees that involve Rubin Observatory data during the 10 years of LSST operations. So thinking about this as one potential goal. We've listed here a few potential advantages of this goal, as well as maybe some things that are missing or potential concerns. Some potential advantages is that it's specific and measurable, although we might probably want to give more thought on if there's a numerical specification needed. It implies some specific actions in the policies being specific. The PhD is it's a significant contribution to the field. It's an intermediate stage in terms of academic progress, so it sort of motivates change, trying to implement changes at earlier stages, and also as a stepping stone to other stages of academia. There will be several generations of graduate students that are participating in LSST, and it's sort of something that the project and the science collaborations can all participate in. It's simple enough, and part of an advantage of Rubin is that large amounts of LSST data will be publicly available. It touches many different institutions. There's a lot of potential for leveraging change within this large scientific community. What could be potentially missing from this goal is that it doesn't necessarily provide accountability on other axes of diversity. We would probably need to think about intermediate goals, and that's actually where part of this discussion will extend as we sort of talk about how we thought about organizing the session. So let me go ahead and talk about how we were thinking about trying to organize the session then, with that, having some kind of goal in mind. So what we'd like to do is there's a number of action steps that happen before the PCW, and talking with you all is one of those. We'd also would like to reach out to the Noir Lab Chief Diversity Officer. We're thinking about trying to get a consultant, an external consultant to help, and I think there's some resources available to do that. So we're trying to start on these preparations now. During the week of the PCW during the week of the PCW itself, so the session right now is scheduled for 60 minutes on Friday. And that was already sort of a concern for us that that even though it is a plenary session, that it appears on the 5th day of the meeting. So we specifically wanted to try to do something that would, raise these topics in people's minds earlier and make sure that it is seen as a priority. So one of the ways we want to do that is during the first plenary, the construction update on Monday, we've asked for 5 minutes to introduce the goals of the session and to let people know that this is coming. And so I believe that has been allocated now, that's now been built into the schedule. So that's one thing that we're trying to do. During the Friday plenary itself, the way that we've been thinking about it so far is that we want the session to be very highly participatory, right? We'd like to have a lot of different people engaging in dialogue and bringing their ideas and sort of actively engaging in the discussion. And so we've been trying to think about setting it up in a way where there's multiple different splinter sessions, or sort of opportunities to break out and have discussions. So we would need some sort of introduction to the session, and then we were thinking about sort of starting off with some reflection about individual spheres of influence. And one way that we were thinking about this is there are some really nice resources that were compiled by the folks who made the Shutdown STEM website and associated sort of activities. But one of these is just thinking about all the different ways in which we as scientists and participants in Rubin, we have many different areas where we can influence outcomes, right? There's many different avenues that we can do this. And so kind of encouraging people to think about those spheres of influence. We want to make sure that there's time to discuss. So one of the ways we were thinking about doing was sort of maybe having some period of discussion sort of organized by the spheres of influence. But then we also wanted to have some period that was more forward-looking, or thinking more about actions or changes that people would like to see. And so we also wanted to, at least in our thinking, we had talked about having splinter sessions that were maybe organized by subgroups within Rubin that would be more focused on thinking about intermediate goals to achieve the big long-term goal, sort of developing a roadmap towards making some steps in these directions, and in particular identifying some indicators and metrics to see that we can see how we are progressing throughout the whole years leading up to the LSST and operations. We think we probably need some sort of wrap up at the end. We need some way to synthesize, and then I think we will definitely need some organization that happens after the PCW to synthesize the discussion ideas that were presented. And this is another area where we might want to ask the consultant to help review or consolidate recommendations. I think we'd want to plan some follow-up session for continued dialogue and implementation. So these were some sort like initial ideas that we have been talking about, and we've circulated this within the SCOC. Even just in the last couple of days, we've been thinking more. I mean, I've been doing more research on change management, specifically in the context of justice, diversity, equity, inclusion goals in science, and there's a piece of me that thinks that sort of this initial plan that we had developed might be too ambitious and might be too much too quickly, or that we would want to give a little bit more thought to this. Again, partly because the research into change management suggests that you can't really, in a problem as complex as this, it requires a sort of a cultural change, a change in norms and expectations. And these can be deep-seated, and it can be, sort of it's often difficult to actually achieve those changes using sort of like the traditional management approaches that are sort of often used in sort of devising scientific experiments. Some of the recommendations, like in this team-up report and other places, is like particularly using this concept of sense-making, shared leadership, and really thinking very concretely about the theory of change. And so I think it sort of connects on to some of our initial thinking, but it might involve a little bit of reframing. So I've tried to collect some thoughts on this sort of in this part of the document, thinking about how we might try to incorporate some of these best practices that are more evidence-based and come from the recommendations of various reports.
Is this a good time to open it up? We have 20 minutes left.
I think so. I think that was basically what I wanted to say. I've put a couple of questions here down at the bottom. Thinking of you all as stakeholders and sort of key agents, and sort of getting buy-in and support for having these kinds of conversations. Yes, let me pause there and see if there's comments, thoughts, questions.
Right. So I think I want to clarify that what we're looking at, we are organizing this. Keith and I are organizing it. We're going to share it, but we really want to organize it in sensible. And so we're looking at all of you to give us suggestions and comments on this, but also to let us know where your sort of where your like Rubin niche is at, and whether this makes sense in the light of that. What is your science collaboration already doing? How much of this will be obsolete if you are really having been thinking about this for a very long time and are very far ahead on this, and how much of this will be out of your grasp if you've never have been your organization, your science collaboration, whatever, however you identify within Rubin, has just not thought about it at all, so that we can strike sort of not exactly a balance, because we think that there's going to be too much diversity in the various segments that we would like to participate, to strike a balance between them, but that we can organize it in a modular enough fashion that there is something for everybody wherever they are at in this roadmap to diversity and inclusion. So in the next 20 minutes, I want to hear some comments, but I also want to ask each science collaboration that has some activities on DEI already to really spend 1 minute telling us what they are and if they were affected by the recent sort of renewed vigor in the civil disruption and in the civil rights movement, whether that has affected the discourse inside of your science collaboration, or whether your science collaboration has taken any action as a result of that. Because I think it would be critical to understand what the momentum is in your science collaboration to make this most relevant. So maybe let's do 10 minutes of comments on this. Actually, maybe we should just go around and also talk about what the science collaborations have on their plate, and then we can comment more comprehensively on the whole thing. Is that okay? So I'm going to very briefly start representing TVS, just to give you a sense of where we are at. I'm going to share my screen. Stop sharing. If I can't kick you out, oh yes, I can. I'm going to share my screen just very briefly. What we have been thinking about diversity and inclusion in a couple of, and we put some words about it. Did you see my screen? I assume you do. I don't see you anymore because I'm working off the browser.
Yes, we can see your screen. It says statement of values.
Right. So we've been thinking about diversity and inclusion. We had in our charter that we have a committee for equity. We have a code of conduct, but we weren't really, honestly, we weren't very active on these fronts at all. So the first thing that we did, we felt like we needed a statement of values, which we collaboratively wrote with comments from the entire science collaboration. And we took advantage of the fact that we wanted to have this statement of values to redesign our website so that it would be actually accessible, thinking about accessibility and various axes of disability in mind. We're also in the process of recording some voiceover of the main points of the website for accessibility concerns. And although there is obviously the solution to this, I think it's been demonstrated by the existence of many committees on diversity and inclusion, that the solution to the problems of diversity and inclusion and racism in academia is not going to be in the creation of another committee. We did nonetheless create a committee because we felt that there was one of the pieces that was needed. We have 4 representatives of the committee that has self-nominated, which primarily at this stage will think about this call to action, which includes 10, I think at this point, 11 things that we think we can do, which include, for example, preparing mentorship, organizing mentorship networks within the science collaboration to make it more accessible. Also, accessing our network to increase recruitment in minority serving institute, historically Black colleges. We're committed to represent ourselves at the next National Society for Black Physicists meeting, and to fundraise for activities along those lines. And we've committed to fundraise not only to organize, sorry, this is not looking right in the format, but not only to organize meetings and bring our own people to the meetings. So all of our future Enabling Science call will also include the budget to allow people from minority serving institutes in the neighborhood of where we organize our meetings to travel to our meetings, and we commit to organize the meetings in locations that are accessible, not just to our members, but also to, generally speaking, URMs. there's more actions, and all those are public on our website. So that's where we are at. I'm trying to stop sharing. Meg, I know that you have something. Can I call you of it?
Sure, okay. I think you can see these.
Yep.
So one thing is that we have thought about diversity, equity, inclusion in terms of, I think, an overall practice. I think obviously things have been a little bit more kickstarted that we should do more, but that's not enough. A couple things I would say is, one, we don't have layers of membership. Everybody gets the same vote. And one of the things I think that's helpful for is, again, early career who are active can vote, and that all of our policies are, it's majority of voting, not the majority of members. So if younger or more diverse people in the membership are more active there and vote, they have ways of changing the leadership and changing all membership on the committee, our working groups. So that's one thing I think that might be different than other collaborations, in that being different membership levels might come with different levels of access or things within a science collaboration. So we're uniform, you're in or you're out. So that might be something to think about as well. So for us, we're organizing I should say that we are, but I'm actually doing all the work, is organizing a collaboration-wide diversity, equity, inclusion discussion. So I'm trying to see if we can get some other collaborations that have dealt with this on big scale, because particularly for solar system, it's kind of the first time that really anyone's organized in a big sense. So I'm working on that. Don't have much to say. That it's the idea to be a brainstorming, actual come up with concrete action items. And the other thing is, we also thought about adding an early career representative to leadership, because one, it's an axis we're not looking at, and they are going to be the most diverse. And so we want to make sure that we're hearing from them by having the ability to show them what it is like to be in the leadership, get them involved without having to do much. So it's not, we're still trying to figure out how we would do that, what's their duties, and make sure we're not burdening anyone who would do that. But again, trying to bring people into the leadership to give us that voice, but also see that maybe that's something they want to do. We talked about, in terms of our sprint we had last week and the week before, other things to do for all these lines. And one things came up was, again, pairing interested undergrads from minority serving institutions with SSC members. We have some SSC members that are at minority serving institutions or teaching only universities. And one of the things that have definitely come up is funding. I can not get our sprints funded. So how would I even get this funded and get someone who would be a coordinator for this actually reimbursed or for their time, and get students paid, stipends? And so although there's a lot of ideas, there's no money. So that's something that came up. So people like this idea, but I don't quite know how do we implement this with a zero budget. And that's with applying to LSST for money. Other thing we're doing is, again, just keeping our website up, because again, we realize early career researchers are going to be the most diverse cohort, and that it's a huge learning curve. And that's one of the things that might be keeping people away. So that's definitely something that's been emphasized to us, is that we need to keep this website updated. So again, my duties on the sprint are to take people's slides, ask them, and then put them up so we have more information and things. This is our readiness sprints really are there to bring in people. This is from our first one in 2018. And I just want to show you the stats, because we had our first all virtual one, last week and the week before. And so again, I'm making assumptions based on name that I know that everybody, and so take that with a grain of salt. I'm doing the best that I can with that, but I broke it down between women and gender minorities, ethnic race minorities within the science collaboration. So not necessarily in their country of origin or their current location, but within the science collaboration, and then early career. And so when we had $20,000 worth of LSSTC funding in 2018, we were able to get 20% women and gender minorities, and then 6% early career, 12% race minorities as well, and ethnic minorities. And then 2019, we had no money from LSSTC, and you can see we had 14 attendees, and it was not very good across the board. And then we did virtual, and we got 53 people signed up approximately, and then you can see women in all axes went up. And so there is something to doing virtual. Like Ken say, it was not as, people were not as, it's not as interactive, it's not as productive, because you're not in the same space. I think that we did as much as we could, and people really enjoyed it. So obviously it seems like we need to do a combination of these in-person activities plus the virtual. which again, how do we get funding to do both and thinking about human power? Because it's mostly on the co-chairs to run these things. So part of me is figuring out how can I spread this out, but just something to show how much I think the funding, especially for in-person activities, is really important because you can see how much has changed, but also virtual and asynchronous seems to really help. So that's all I've got, and that's what we're thinking about right now. And I think more is going to come out of this discussion we're going to have within the wider collaboration. But it was decided to make it more equitable. If we did it within a week, that might not get everybody who might want to join. So we figured we need to give it more time and give a couple weeks so that people can make time in their schedule to have a 2 or 3 hour discussion as a starting point.
Thank you. So we're running a little behind in time.
Right.
10 minutes. Can I?
Yeah, I've got like 2 sentences.
Perfect.
Yeah, so Milky Way Plus, or we actually have not been organized enough to even think about this yet. But it's certainly something that we need to do. I like the idea of what was shown about value statements and getting the collaboration as a whole to think about it. We are also a single tier collaboration, and I personally have a fair amount of DEI exposure since I work at a Hispanic serving institution. So
that definitely helps. Personal experience definitely helps.
Yeah, it's a diversity and inclusion is a very big thing in the California community college system.
But that's great. I mean, thinking about leveraging that network, right? How can your science collaboration and maybe all the science collaborations leverage? Rachel, can you say a couple of words about this?
Yes. So in terms of recent events, we had an open discussion, asynchronous, on Slack, facilitated by members of our collaboration council during the Strike for Black Lives, and that there was a lot of enthusiasm among the collaboration for activities meant to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion. So in terms of what will happen with those ideas in the longer term, as it happened, the council was working on an EDI committee for months at that point. They had been preparing to stand one up, and so the events in late May and early June accelerated the timeline to standing up a bit and will likely affect its early focus. But that committee exists now, and it is intended to be like a long-term standing committee with broad EDI responsibilities, including education and monitoring and so on. The committee's charge includes fostering an inclusive environment while promoting equity and diversity within the collaboration, and they're expected to consult with available external resources and expertise, especially from well-established social science research when carrying out their work, which I think is really important. They have a lot of support in the collaboration from the council, and like Pat and I are, of course, really happy to give them, the support they need to work with working group leads, for example. So they're going to be taking some time to develop a plan for what activities to pursue. And when I told them about this meeting, they said they were really excited to collaborate with Rubin Observatory or other science collaborations on EDI activities. So I hope they'll be able to come to the event at the PCW. We also have a code of conduct and a junior desk organization that I can tell people about if they're interested.
Your judo is quite unique among the science collaboration. I think that may be a very good vehicle. And so, and at some point, if you have any evidence that it was a good vehicle for diversity and inclusion, your junior collaboration members organization.
Yes.
If anybody else really wants to step up, I'll give you the virtual microphone. Otherwise, we are 6 minutes in. I want to emphasize one thing, which is that I really think that it would be super crucial to coordinate. That one of the pieces that is going to be crucial is to coordinate, because we're all struggling with this. At least I think we're all struggling with this. And I think we're doing a lot of similar effort, and we can share experiences and share results and share best practices. I see Chad. Do you want to say a word of that?
Well, you guys can read that, but I actually had another question that I wanted to bring up quick. There was the enabling science proposal that was put in. How does that relate to what Keith just discussed?
So that is for PCW 2021. You're talking about the enabling science proposal about the anti-racism session specifically. That was for PCW 2021 because we felt that, and we consulted with the organization that we were wanting to bring, that's going to be more fruitful if it's in person as a kind of activity. And that was led by Andres Plazas. So that's still on the table, and I heard through the grapevine, by the way, that the enabling science proposals are in an advanced stage of review, so we should hear back. And I think, given the timing, I'm quite hopeful that that will get funded, and that will still happen. As it was conceived, that's designed to be more helpful if it's an in-person activity. That is not to say that we can't organize other online activity or turn that into an online activity, and maybe if we do that, there will be more money that are available for more activities, not just one. Any other questions or comments as we have 4 minutes left? Also comments on the PCW session as we envisioned it. And Keith, I assume we can, if not that document itself, because it may have too many notes in it, but we can make a copy of that document that is maybe a little bit more clean and share it for comments with the science collaboration chairs. Would you be opposed to that? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Happy to do it. I think it's already shared.
Excellent.
And it's in its current state.
I've got one piece of feedback, which is I'm a little worried that was interesting listening to Dara Norman's talk where she kind of went through and put it the right way of framing that, like, Sloan said it would do all of these things in diversity, and it maybe didn't necessarily meet up to what they had sold it as. And I'm worried that we're putting that your first proposal has, we're going to do this, and there's no money behind it. And that so that's my worry, is that it's going to be this big thing where we're going to get together and chat and then nothing happens. And that's what I don't want it to look like, is that at the end of it, right? So I think if there's, and there's an LSSTC session where they're like, we might have money, let's talk about it. So to me, it felt like that either that's got to be like merged, and if they agreed to give money, then maybe you can say that goal. But I'm worried you will have a goal that has no, we're going to spend an hour to try to then do that goal. And then it's not very clear how that's...
Let me clarify about the LSSTC session. There is also an LSSTC session on diversity and inclusion. That money which the LSSTC has already donated from a foundation is for a specific program. So it just happens to, the timing just happened to be coincidental. That's what that was awarded prior pandemic, perhaps even, for a specific program, the LINK program, which Jenna will talk about at the SC's advisory committee, LSSTC SC's advisory committee in 3 Fridays. So I actually have talked to the corporation, and they're trying to sort of stretch that and see how many other DEI initiatives they can fund without getting in trouble with that organization that awards those money. And also, we have been talking about renewing the portfolio with more focus on DEI in general. I mean, at the end of the day, if I can try to address the question, my sense is that, of course, resources are crucial to make it happen. But at the same time, if we wait until we get resources, if past experience is teaching us anything, we're just never going to do anything, because if resources are hard to come by.
I don't think it's just resources. I don't think in an hour you're going to have a plan to fill that big goal. And so my worry is this is a whole and that's my worry, is that's what we're starting with, is it's an hour and a half, and then that's the goal, right? Long term, we're going to do this, and then there's no plan of follow up. And so to me, I feel like this would be like a day-long workshop, and then this would be a great whole structure, and saying this is the goal. We want to spend 3 days figuring out how the hell we do this and go do it. And to me, it feels like it's in that time plus not having money, the combination. And so. Right. And that, if this was a 3-day workshop, we could probably brainstorm ways around that funding thing. But I'm worried it's going to be so rushed, and that I like this whole thing that was talked about in terms of the change. I forget the right word, that I feel like I don't know anything about that. Probably most of us don't. That if you focus that way, that might help us then as we're going forward to learn how to do it right versus we're always trying to solve the problem the wrong way because it's the way we know how to do it. And that might be a better way to focus for an hour session.
Keith, do you wanna? We're at the end of the hour, so if anybody wants to leave, but if you want to try and answer that.
Yeah, so that's, as I've been thinking about this more, right? Like, so it's like Ben and I have been sort of talking about this like in real time, and more and more as I think about it, I tend to agree with that suggestion, right? That we might need to think very carefully about what is achievable in an hour and focus more on creating a sustained forum for having these discussions and really sort of like leveraging what we can do as a Ruben ecosystem that would be more challenging to do within our individual science collaborations or project, et cetera.
Right, and initially we had envisioned, and that too, I don't know that we think that it's still possible to produce it or to produce the backbone for it. But we had envisioned to really focus on road mapping so that we could produce a roadmap that has identifiable benchmarks and actions that you can take based on what is the next benchmark for your, filling whatever your Ruben identity is. And so I still hope that that discussion leads to identifying what are like the places where the pieces of Ruben are at, and pull from the discussion in groups what are the items that people feel are actionable at that place, to then carry on the discussion based on that, and maybe build this network of people that have intention to pursue those ideas. So I think that is to say I also completely agree, but 1 hour is what we have.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a tough spot. I just think I feel like that goal would be like an opener for like a 3-day workshop. And maybe it's worth having that workshop, right, as a virtual workshop.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe it's announcing that at this hour-long thing. But that's my only thing I'm like, I just worry that we'll have this thing at the end of it that it'll look like nothing got done, because I agree that should be a goal, but it will look, I'm not sure we'll get very far in an hour. So that's all. I definitely agree with everything you're all saying.
I definitely am not sure either. And that point's very well taken. People are leaving at a rapid pace because they're going on to their next calls. But I really appreciate the discussion, and I really hope to see more comments on our straw person plan about how to continue refining the details of the session and how to continue on past the session.
Is there a good place to, not just sort of take specific comments on the document, but have like bigger questions about the structure and like what can be achieved in an hour? I just don't know what the best forum is for that, since I'm not part of the.
No, I agree that it probably wouldn't. So my immediate thought is to create a Slack channel for that. We do have a lot of Slack channels, but I don't see a natural Slack channel for it. Or maybe even a community place, a place on community, but people are more reluctant to go on community, I think, in general, across the science collaborations than on Slack. Thoughts?
I mean, so I think right now that document is edit privileges. So, I mean, I think we could even just create a section in the document where people can put in their long form responses.
Oh. Sure, definitely.
Can we just use a science collaboration chairs Slack?
Keith is not on it. I don't have any objection to put him on it. Historically, PS project science team and science collaborations are on that channel only. So I would want to just to be extra cautious, let everybody know that I'm letting somebody who's neither in, but I also would have no problems doing that.
I mean, even if it's temporarily, like.
Yeah.
But wouldn't a dedicated channel be better rather than diluting this discussion with other things?
Right, and a dedicated channel could continue, right? If we do organize a 3 days or whatever workshop, or if we do organize coordination of the activities, we could continue using that channel in the future.
And it means that more people can be involved, right? Because you don't want to keep adding to that other group, whereas this could build a community that are invested in change.
So I will make the channel. I also think, Keith, we can make space for long-form comments on the document. Can we enforce editing in suggestion mode so that that makes sure that people don't just go in and edit the
I'll see if I can turn that on.
Yeah, and I thank you very much. Appreciate the discussion very, very much.